David Littleproud, welcome to the program. Now, you set the bar pretty high for Friday's National Cabinet meeting. You said it was a flashpoint for the Federation. Did the leaders pass the test?
Well, they've finally shown some intent, David, to look at this issue. I wasn't calling for a broad-scale pulling down of restrictions from states. What I was asking for was common sense and asking state leaders to understand that they govern for all their state, not just for capital cities, that regional and rural areas have different needs and different requirements than what they do in metropolitan areas, and we just simply impose some common sense in allowing agricultural production systems which are integrated now. I mean, our forefathers put lines on a map over 100 years ago. Well, modern regional Australia has outgrown that. We're integrated in our agricultural production systems, in our communities, and most importantly in our health. And when we have perverse outcomes that aren't predicated by medical fact and science about showing our fellow Australian, who might just be on the other side of a border, the rights that they deserve in having health treatment and being able to undertake business in a safe way, that's not common sense. This isn't about calling people's names, and this isn't about parochialism. It's great that we all are parochial about our states, but at the end of the day, we are all Australians. We are going to have to learn to live with this virus for some time. And what that takes is leadership and common sense in making sure we undertake practical solutions.
Well, let's look at those.
Use common sense in making sure we keep people safe and keep the nation moving.
All right, well, let's look at practically what's going to happen. So after the National Cabinet meeting on Friday, you've been given the task to work with your state counterparts over the next week or two and come up with a new code for agricultural workers crossing the border. What's your ultimate aim here? What would you like to see this achieve?
Well, look, Dave, let me make this clear. Ultimately, it will still be the chief medical officers in each of the states that will have to give approval. If it had been left to the individual state agricultural ministers and myself, this would have been done. In fact, we had an agreement between us in January, February. We preemptively looked at this as agricultural ministers, but we are out-trumped by health because ultimately this is a health decision around keeping Australians safe, and we ultimately respect that. Make no mistake.
All right, so what's this code going to do then? What's it going to achieve?
Yeah, so what it'll do, David, is hopefully be able to give chief medical officers comfort around making sure that each of those farmers and agricultural businesses that need to cross have a COVID-safe plan, be able to trace where they've been, and in fact have PPE at their disposal for whatever the requirement is of the state that they're going into. But let me make it clear.
So how do you do that? Sorry, let me just jump in there. How do you do that? How do you make sure a farm worker, it might be a harvester, a vet, even a truck driver. How do you make sure that they can show where they've been for the last 2 weeks?
Well, there's traceability procedures that can be followed, and in fact, you can look at what happens in a pub when you walk in. You simply put down a list of the people that you come into contact with. We've got the COVID Safe app that we would obviously request people to have as well. So we'll work through that with chief medical officers to make sure they have comfort in it. But let me make this clear. They don't need to wait 2 weeks for this. States can act unilaterally on this because 2 weeks is still going to see severe outcomes for agricultural production systems, and particularly animal welfare. We're already seeing where farmers, if we wait another 2 weeks, we are seeing farmers that are not going to be able to get to their properties just because they're outside of a bubble, not get up to treat their animals. Where if I'm a truck driver in Melbourne, I can apply for a freight permit and fly right the way through the border. But if I'm a farmer just outside the 100-kilometre bubble in an area where there is no COVID cases, I can't go through.
So
that's not common
just
sense.
coming back to practically how this will work. Just coming back to practically how this will work. Would they just sign a piece of paper saying, you know, I haven't left this COVID-free region, or would they have some sort of tracking of their mobile phone, or practically how would this work?
Well, that's what we'll try and work through with the ag ministers to get some consistency. There may be, because of the sovereignty of the states, they may want to have some extra requirements state between state. We respect that, but ultimately it will come down to them and what the chief medical officers in each of those states. Well, I'm open to anything that will allow our farmers the freedom of navigation that they require to get to undertake agricultural production that keeps food and fibre to this country. And that's just common sense, but we should do it in a safe way. And I think we can do it if we're listened to. And this is the thing is, out here, we feel like we're the forgotten Australians. These decisions have been predicated on capital cities, not on regional Australians. We're just asked to be listened to. It's really distressing for not only businesses, but when you see the human toll of people not being able to access medical attention because that's where they get it from the other side of the border. That's not Australian. That's not what we do to one another. We try and look after one another. We try and do that in a safe way. And that's where we're just saying to the states, they have the power. Let's show the leadership.
You mentioned animal welfare. Normally about 480 Kiwi New Zealand shearers come over to help on properties in Victoria and New South Wales each year. What's going to happen there? There's talk of some special flight to bring them in?
Yeah, look, we're working with the industry, as with a number of agricultural industries around labour supply and the shortage that we have at the moment. And in fact, on Friday National Cabinet, there was an agreement around expanding that pilot that we undertook up in the Northern Territory for the mango pickers, the 170 mango pickers we brought in. We're now saying to the states that you can openly work through, and we'll provide visas under the Pacific Work and the seasonal worker programs for you to bring in those from those countries that wish to participate, isolate in your own state and then allow them to work. Particularly with shearers, they're seen as skilled workers. So in fact, there's even a clearer pathway for them. The Australian Border Force Commissioner, as I understand, now has the approval to simply approve their visas as they come in. So we're working with industry to make sure we can achieve that. But we've already made sure that we're understanding the labour needs that are going to hit our agricultural production systems back in March. We extended the ability for visa holders to say an extra 12 months if they worked in ag.
Let me turn to the Ruby Princess, Minister. Can you now clear up who gave permission for passengers to leave the ship?
The Department of Agriculture gave approval after the New South Wales Department of Health gave advice that it was safe. The Department of Agriculture relies on the Department of Health in each individual state and also Border Force in terms of making sure that they give green lights for what they specialise in.
And we'll come to what they're meant to do.
That's received.
We'll come to what they're meant to do.
But pratique is provided.
Okay, so when did they give pratique for disembarkation?
Well, they gave it on the 19th of March. The exact time I don't have in front of me, but Mr Walker has extensively gone through the chain of events. In fact,
well, he's come up with something different to what your department secretary said about what time pratique was given. There's confusion over this, and whether the proper steps were followed.
No, there's no confusion, David.
Well, okay, let me quote to you. The head of your department, Andrew Metcalf, told the Senate inquiry this week that one of the department's officers granted permission around 6:30am, and off they went. The submission from the Commonwealth to the Walker inquiry said it was 7:39am.
Well, that was when the communication was formally sent, was able to be sent because of technical issues around the ability to send messages out off the boat. There was communications issues,
right.
But
so pratique was granted at 6:30am.
New South Wales
You're
Health,
saying 6:30am is when pratique was granted by your officers?
I'll allow the department secretary, who has said that he will come back and give specifics on this.
Well, you just said there's no confusion about this, Minister. With respect, you just said there's no confusion and you don't know.
Well, there is none, David.
When was permission granted?
I think you're trying to conflate and confuse issues here.
Okay, let me be clear. When was permission granted? I just want to be clear about this.
Well, as the department secretary said in that hearing, is that he will go back and make sure that he can check those times, but he had 2 times that was provided to him, and the difference was predicated on the fact that communication lines, where it was formally being able to be recorded, was sometime after the event of it formally being given on the boat. That's not anything new.
Okay, as of where we sit this morning,
I think what you've got to understand is
the sorry, Minister, sorry to jump in here, but I just want to be clear about this. You don't know when permission was granted by your department officers for people to leave the ship.
Yes, we do, David. And as I said,
So when
the
was
exact
it?
time of that I don't have, and the Department Secretary. Well, as I said, David, please understand the exact time the Department Secretary is ascertaining, and we'll go back to the Senate inquiry. But
So you don't know?
it doesn't make any difference because, no, David, if you let me finish, that the facts are that they were able to provide an approval, whether that was formally recorded sometime later, was predicated on communication issues around technology, in no way, not in terms of any of the processes that led up to that. And I think we're trying to conflate issues and confuse issues.
I'm just trying to get some clarity on this. Okay, well,
has very
so at
comprehensively.
6:30 a.m. or thereabouts, your departmental officer from the Department of Agriculture gives permission for people to leave the ship. But they had not done what's called the traveller with illness checklist they were meant to do. Is that correct?
They gave approval on the advice of New South Wales Health.
No, but they're meant to do a traveller with illness checklist. That's what I'm asking about. They hadn't done that, had they?
Well, yeah, okay, David, and I'll answer the question. It's very technical, so it's important you allow me to answer this. What happened is that there is a process that had been agreed between New South Wales Health and the Department of Agriculture. Those protocols were changed some weeks before, or an additional
because of the pandemic,
which is the traveller illness. Well, I'll finish, David. It's very important, yes. The tick. Previously, the tick form was never required if there was medical professionals on the vessel, and that was the case that they'd worked under previously. And in fact, we changed those protocols with New South Wales Health
because
and
of
all
the
the
pandemic.
state health officials that a tick form should now be required, as in addition to what was done previously.
And they didn't do it, did they?
Now, that wasn't followed by New South Wales Health. That wasn't followed by New South Wales Health or the Department of Agriculture. But Mr. Walker, in his findings, did not see that as anything material in the outcome of the tragedy that took place on the Ruby Princess. He has been very specific that it was the expert panels from New South Wales Health that were in full charge of human health, gave the recommendations, and allowed the boat to have.
And just to finish on this issue,
that has to be very clear.
No, it is clear. It is clear. That's clear where the failing was made by Brett Walker. Gladys Berejiklian has apologised because of that failure by New South Wales Health. Will you now apologise for the failure of your own department to carry out the tick?
Well, David, I'm very sympathetic to the 28 families that have lost loved ones out of this, and the Australian government is sorry for any loss of life during this COVID-19. But we are working off the Walker inquiry that quite clearly, in its recommendations and its findings, found quite clearly that it was the failure of New South Wales Health expert panel that caused this, that they were in charge of human health, and that if there is anything that comes forward, let me make this clear, I will be pursuing it vigorously, and in fact I have asked the Inspector General of Biosecurity to actually overview this process even closer to make sure there's nothing that's been missed either by Mr. Walker or the Senate inquiry that's going on at the moment, and the Department Secretary looks very, very closely at the department and anything else that may be gleaned out of this. This is something we should learn, but we shouldn't be prosecuting people or individuals or departments that have done no wrong and have not been found to do any wrong at this point in time. But I am still open, make it clear, I'm still open that if I find anything else, I will fix it, and I'll fix it quickly, and I'll hold those to account if they have done something wrong. But at this point, working off what Mr. Walker has quite explicitly put through, the Department of Agriculture
he wasn't able to,
albeit a little bit clumsy in communication.
Okay, the federal government wouldn't allow, I just want to point out, any of your officials to appear before that Walker inquiry, so it was somewhat limited in its ability to question any of the officials. Let's move on though. China this week has launched an anti-dumping investigation into Australian wine. It follows actions already on barley, on beef. Do you think the government's strategy is working here of not calling this out as economic coercion?
Well, David, I think you need to be very careful on this because you did mention beef there. One of the 4 abattoirs that have had their licences suspended is in fact majority Chinese owned. So they haven't arbitrarily just put it straight across every Australian business they can find. Right. So we look at each one of these, in fact, work through them in the process. Many of those abattoirs some of those have previously failed some of the labelling requirements sending across. Barley, we will continue to vigorously defend that we have not subsidised or dumped barley into China, and the same with wine. In fact, Australia, of the 37 OECD countries, there is only New Zealand that subsidises their farmers less than Australian farmers get. So you've got to understand that we don't subsidise our farmers. They're on their own 2 feet. We'll vigorously defend that, and if required, we'll go through the process and go to the WTO. And we've got form for that. In fact, when you put it in perspective around China, we actually have taken action in the WTO against India and Canada. So when we're trying to single out China, we just need to be careful and put it in perspective and look at it on its individual merits and work through it calmly and methodically.
Let me ask you this then finally. Figures this week did show that about a third of Australia's food and agricultural exports are going to China. We hear a lot of talk about trying to broaden out our trade partners and so on to diversify our markets, but it looks like we're becoming more and more concentrated than ever when it comes to the Chinese market in agriculture.
Yeah, David, look, grade 8 business economics tell you not to have market concentration to spread your risk. But ultimately, that's a decision of individual businesses, not for the government. Our job is to provide the opportunity for them to send it into other markets, and we've done that with free trade agreements to Korea, Japan, TPP 11, Indonesia, and we're currently working through with the UK and EU. And we would say to our exporters that you should spread your risk, that you shouldn't have market concentration. That is a simple business principle, but ultimately it is your decision. Governments can't do everything for you and shouldn't be blamed for everything that goes wrong that is outside our remit. We're just saying to them, you have an opportunity now. The government has been very forward-leaning in providing you market opportunities. You should explore them and undertake them, and we'll continue to look for more opportunities for them. That's our job, to put the environment and infrastructure around our people and let them get on with the job of making money for this nation.